Reclaim is a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter, with your host, Thais Sky. Together, we will explore the questions of what does it look like to reclaim our sovereignty, our worthiness, our voices as women in this messy world. No topics are barred as we offer roundtable discussions on life, spirituality, politics, and what it means to be a woman in the modern age. Let's do this. All right. It's Thais Sky, your host for Reclaim, a podcast where we have conversations that matter. I am excited to be here with you all for another week of brilliant conversations. I mean, if I may say so myself. I'm here, I'm in my closet, and I have a lot of fun little things to share with you before we bring in Abigail and Naomi. First, Christmas came a little bit early in my household, and I got a whole new podcast equipment situation, which is really cool. And hopefully in the future, I'll have a whole space that's not a closet that I can be using this fancy schmancy podcasting stuff that I got. But in the meantime, it's just really cool. I get to be in my closet still, but I get to use higher gear, better gear. My old microphone was falling apart, and it's really cool. As anybody knows that, when you love something, you like geek out over new products, right? So that's what's happening over here. I am totally geeking out over new products. Thank you, honey, for getting me this amazing new podcast set. What else? Oh, my workbook. If you have not yet downloaded my workbook, you are really missing out. I've had over 250 people download my Worthy Women Rise Year in Review. Even if you are not a woman, you are more than welcome to download this workbook. It is a gender-neutral workbook, even though it's called Worthy Women Rise. It's a really good way for you to close the energy of your 2017 before leaning into the newness of 2018. You can grab that on my website, thaissky.com/year. That's YEAR, thaissky.com/year. Go get the workbook before I take it down. This shit's really good. You're going to want it. It's like 40 some pages, 50 journal prompts, rituals, ceremonies, all of the good things. And I've been getting some really good reviews about it. So speaking of reviews, actually, I want to read to you 2 reviews that I got on the podcast. This is from Sarah. Sarah writes, "Thank you for creating a space for us to keep waking up to the nuance of spirituality, practical and grounded encouragement to see clearly and get our hands dirty." Thank you, Sarah, for that beautiful review. This is from Ketty. "I'm so into this podcast by the brilliant Thais Sky for some real talk about current issues, spirituality, the feminine experience, and so much more. I love that through the wisdom and experiences shared by both Thais and the interviewee, I continue to feel challenged, pushed to my edge, and more aware and mindful. It's a beautiful hour each week that I honor as an opportunity for growth, and for that I am deeply grateful." Wow. Thank you, both of you, for sharing a review. I know that sometimes it's like a bitch and a half to share a review on iTunes, and I love that. I love that you went and did that. And if you have not yet reviewed my podcast, what the fuck are you waiting for? Seriously, it helps with the algorithms. It helps more people find Reclaim. So if this podcast has touched you in any way, you know how much I would appreciate you leaving a quick review on iTunes. I would really appreciate it. Okay. I have something that I've been sitting with that I want to share with you, and then we'll get into the interview. Around this time of the year, we are really faced with a lot of sadness, as I've shared in last week's episode on grief with Andy Grace. Sadness and loss and disappointments are kind of a part of the finality of a year, and you're allowed to experience all those things. And I also think that we add an unnecessary layer of disappointment and sadness when we set such high expectations of what the next year should bring. So I know that we get into the hype of New Year's resolutions around this time of the year. Part of that is so natural and fun and normal to bring intentionality around what you want to create. I mean, we want to be mindful of what we put out into the world. And there's nothing wrong with setting goals and visualizing your year and writing down what you want. In fact, I highly recommend you doing so if you don't have that type of practice in your life. But I also want to be careful that we're not using these tools like vision boards and word of the year and, all these New Year's resolutions, all these other ways that can build excitement, but can also build a tremendous amount of expectation for ourselves and our lives. And then the year goes by, we look back at the year and we realize that our goals didn't accomplish, we didn't accomplish the goals we wanted to, or we didn't become the person we wanted to be. And we're not 30 pounds lighter and blonder and whatever beauty stereotypes that we think that we need to fall into in order to be more loved. And so then we feel a lot of expectation let down. We feel vulnerability hangover. We feel like we allow this to feed into our self-hate and our sense of disappointment in ourselves. And that's not helpful. And that only leads us into a spiral of self-help, right? Like we always need to be helped. We always need another hit. We always need another thing to keep us in the broken, needing to fix mentality. And I'm telling you right now, you're not broken, okay? And I know that we need this reminder like every motherfucking day. I hear that. So hear me now. You are not broken. So be gentle with yourself as the new year comes up. Be gentle with yourself as you plan out what you want and the goals that you want to set. Be gentle with yourself because you do not have to change all of who you are. That's what I mean by you're not broken. There's not a part of you that needs to be changed. Sure, there may be a parts of you that wants growth. There may be parts of you that wants healing. There may be parts of you that wants to deepen your experience of life. But you inherently are not some toy that needs to be changed in order for you to be a better individual. Those are all lies. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe those narratives because it's you're never going to get there. You're never going to get to the place where you feel perfect and lovable and holy and whole and whatever else. Like that's a expectation we put on ourselves that's just completely unattainable. Instead, we want to just fall deeper into who we are, into this imperfect human experience. We want to open and get more curious, right? So that's it. That's all I have. Just be gentle with yourself as the New Year's comes up. Get curious. Get excited. If you want vision boards, do vision boards. If you want word of the year, do word of the year. I personally said no to vision boarding last year because I realized that staring at a bunch of pictures of things I don't have doesn't inspire me to have them. It actually only reminds me of what I don't have. And I don't feel like that's the energy that I want to be constantly carrying around, is this energy of, well, didn't make it to Bali this year. I must be an inadequate person because it was on my vision board for a whole year and I didn't make it there. Instead, I'd rather think about it as my gratitude board. And so I don't create any boards, but I'm just saying, like, if you don't want to do a vision board, but you still like the idea of creating, I would do like a gratitude board and just make a board of all the things that are in your life that you forget to be grateful for. To me, that sounds like much more exciting. And I don't want to use the dogmatic gratitude as like a wash over, the hard shit. I'm just saying, peoples, that vision boards are not the end all be all. If you don't have something on your vision board, it doesn't mean that you are not going to get that thing. In fact, not having a vision board, not going window shopping and imagining myself living a life that I don't lead right now, none of that stuff helped me. What helps me is to ground into what I have and to ground into the love that is here and to ground into my body. And maybe that's the permission you need to not create a vision board. I don't know what you need. But that's all. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Your life would not be ruined if you don't have a vision board. So if you needed that permission, there is your permission. Okay, so let's bring on Naomi and Abigail. These two lovely beauties are yoga teachers. And so this conversation that we're about to have is around how to navigate the hard things in life through the practice of yoga and the role that yoga can play and the tools that we learn in yoga to help navigate life. I know many of us are yoga practitioners. Many of us maybe have had their lives transformed because of yoga. That's certainly true for me. But there's also a lot of things that aren't not really good about yoga. And Naomi and Abigail and I share some of our thoughts around what we can do to make sure that our yoga is really embodied, is really not creating more violence and problems into the world. So Abigail Rose Clarke believes there is magic in the marrow of our bones. Is that how you pronounce that? Marrow? Marrow? This is my Brazilianness. I have no idea how to fucking pronounce that word. Okay. Anyway, you know what I mean. The center of the bones, right? And that's simply resting our hands against the rough bark of a tree can bring us back to earth and back to ourselves. Her work focuses on helping people truly inhabit their own skin and blood and guts and bones, and in doing so, re-enter into true relationship with the world. As a developer of the embodied life method, Abigail teaches embodiment as a practice and as a responsibility. As the world shakes and burns and floods, as white supremacy takes its death gasps, we are tasked with the enormous responsibility of remaining present to the world as it is, which requires that we remain present to ourselves as we are. From here, the way forward becomes possible. Her work is enormously influenced by her study and practice of embodied yoga, which she is a senior teacher, as well as her background as a trained scientist. In addition to online and in-person teaching the embodied life method, Abigail also trains yoga teachers in the U.S. and Mexico, where she makes her home in the indigenous village of Yelapa on the Jalisco coast, or is it Jalisco? That sounds beautiful. And then we have Naomi. Naomi Doe Moody. I love her name. Naomi, I'm a self-healing helper in the Usui Reiki lineage and the wise woman tradition of folk herbalism, and a guide on the path of classically informed contemporary yoga. I use energy medicine and earth wisdom to enhance my weekly classes, monthly workshops, and private intuitive energy work sessions. I've been using yoga, meditation, tarot, crystals, and plant medicine as tools for self-healing since I was very young. Each of these methods have helped me to move through suffering and become who I am now. These tools and techniques have reconnected me to myself and taught me that we are each our own best healer. I'm going to try to not butcher any more of these beautiful beings' bio. Please forgive me. I am forever grateful to all my teachers and guides, including my mentors, students, friends, and family, people, plant, mineral, animal, and ancestral, for allowing me the space to learn, grow, heal, and change. My one goal as a guide is to offer you the space and encouragement to do the same. Whew. All right. So this is a really, really important conversation on yoga. And as you're listening, I want you to be thinking about, what do you use your yoga practice for? Does your yoga inform your life, or do you use yoga as a way to run away from life? Neither is good and bad. It's just an opportunity for you to check in and get clear with, what is your relationship with yoga? How has yoga benefited your life? And does your yoga teachers have the hard conversations in the classroom? Hello, Abigail, Naomi. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let's go. Let's dive in. Let's go right into, let's talk about reclamation. Let's talk about what's been coming up within your hearts as we're writing such a tumultuous time in our society right now. I feel like it's always been tumultuous on some level. And now it kind of feels like it's one thing after another. And we're feeling a lot of things. And I kind of want to dive into the heart of that. Like, what is coming up for us as we're riding the human roller coaster in the backdrop of coming from, the quote unquote spiritual being in the human world?
Honestly, what's coming up for me is a lot of silence and space. Like, I'm noticing in my own personal spiritual practice, it isn't, like you said earlier, it isn't that I'm turning away from reality or I'm shutting out the outside world. I'm definitely bringing my knowledge and awareness of what's been happening into my practice, but creating a lot of space around it so that there isn't too much formalized practice. Like, we're talking about how we have this common thread of yoga, and with me, my yoga has become much more expansive and much more open-ended and much more it's not quite so regimented or so structured as it was before, simply to have that space to kind of process everything. Because I think that with everything happening on one on top of the other for God knows how long, for the beginning of my lifetime, definitely, that there just needs to be some time and some space to process while still being able to move into the world, and to speak to what's happening.
Yeah, I think that there is I've noticed in me a desire to sort of push a lot of the pain away, especially as it's felt, especially in this last month, has it's felt like there isn't any time to come up for air. It's like there's just I turn on the news or I start reading my social media and it's like, oh, another heartbreaking thing, and that has been going on for a long time. But at the scale that it's been on since, with all of these superstorms and earthquakes, it is very real. And what I've been, it's great that you talk about space, Naomi, because I think a main part of the practice that is nourishing me is that space, and the space of being uncomfortable and not looking to make not looking to make it more comfortable by looking for meaning. Like not trying to make a story about my own discomfort or our global discomfort and what that could mean and how there's something to be done about it. And I think, in my own practice of yoga, that's really that's what I'm leaning on is the way that yoga has shown me that there isn't actually a lot, like you don't need to make meaning all the time. But I think as humans, we try to.
Yeah.
So that, and also trying to expand in the spaciousness, trying to expand my capacity to feel everything, because it's really easy to get pulled into just feeling the one thing, which is right now like total nervous system overwhelm and quite a lot of fear and quite a lot of despair. And so then it's also a beautiful day, and it's also, I'm also spending time with loved ones, and I'm also, bringing in the fall harvest. So what does it mean to hold both and to not turn away from one or the other, but to really expand enough to be able to hold both? And what I think I see a lot of in the critique on, especially the yoga world, about being a spiritual bypassing process, where we kind of like bypass reality to get to the reality that we want, is that the expansion into both sides isn't equal. Yeah. It's like, it's so that we try and we're trying to focus so much on what we want. And it's a beautiful thing to know the vision that we're all aiming for. But if we do that by turning away from what's happening, then we're doing a bypassing. So that's what I've been trying to do in my practice.
Yeah.
And it is not always pretty and it's definitely not always easy, and it's not always graceful at all, but that's been what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I really relate to that. I feel like that has been my struggle. I have a small Facebook group of yoga students and clients and just people that I know and friends, where we are going through a 40-day sadhana together, a 40-day spiritual practice. We're just checking in on the group and kind of sharing what we've been doing. And part of my own personal practice has been that, not only to create that space for myself where I can reflect and I can experience, but also to continue inviting in that gratitude, because I'm in a position now where I live in this place that is extremely gorgeous. Like, I'm living on this land in a yurt with my adorable family in this extremely beautiful place, and every day is like idyllic and gorgeous. And yet I know just outside of my door, like, shit is things are like the world is fucking, it feels like exploding. And being able to, like, in the mornings, being able to be in both spaces at once, or back and forth, but yeah, still being able to recognize that.
I had
that, yeah.
this interesting experience the other day where for many eons, many I'm just going to say many months, not many eons, but for many months I've carried this sensation, this feeling that as yoga teachers, as people in the spiritual community, we need to be speaking on what's going on in the world, and we have to be allowing that to inform our practice, so that our practice is grounded in reality and not grounded on cultivating a separation of our own bubble-ness. That is a very privileged bubble, because many people don't even have that ability. And then I walked into a yoga class the other week, and it was the day of 9/11, right? So it was 9/11. I walked into the yoga class praying that she was not going to speak on 9/11, and she was not going to speak on what's going on in the world, because I was coming into that yoga practice to just be on my mat for just an hour and not think about the world. And so it was such a juxtaposition in that moment of both this need for us to be using our spiritual practices to inform our lives and inform our reality, while simultaneously needing the space sometimes to completely unplug. And I'm wondering what you two have felt in that. If you felt something similar, or how you've used that space to deepen your experience, instead of while simultaneously knowing that there times needs to be an unplug.
I think for me, so part of my teaching has shifted quite significantly, and I don't actually teach a lot of public classes anymore. I primarily teach yoga teachers, and I teach on embodied anatomy and embodied touch, the way that we can basically like learn different qualities of touch and different qualities of holding space. And so that has meant that I've been a little bit removed. I did teach some public classes this summer, but again, it's really different when you're just kind of stepping into guest teach versus holding a space week after week. So I'm guessing that Naomi has more to speak to on what it means to hold a continual container. But what like this again is kind of speaking, I think, to where some of the challenges lie, in that you know, when we are coming into a space, when we are in such a stew pot of the reality of the world. So what does it mean to create a ritualistic container? And I do think that one of the things that we're really lacking are these sort of ritual spaces. And I think that that's a reason why yoga has become this like multi-billion-dollar industry, is because it offers this potential to have ritual space in a society that's been sort of sterilized from that. So, and if that's not done with a clear understanding of what it is that we're going to go get, that we're going to receive, and what it is that we're holding, I see that as something that is lacking within public classes. Not everywhere, and not with every teacher, and not with every student, but there's a sort of, you know, as it's become this thing of people using, you know, I have lots of really mixed feelings on what it's meant to have yoga kind of permeate our culture so much and be changed by and change our culture so much. But in terms of like going to your question, Thais, of like, what does it mean to sort of want to unplug and then also need to be in the world? I think we have to be really careful that our practice both gives us time to be still and be in ourselves and like soothe the nervous system that is getting completely like overwhelmed, while also not turning away. And that takes some real skill, and that might not be able to be done in a 90-minute class or an hour-long class. And so, and part of that is sort of the agreement that is often lacking on what a class is going to be, because a lot of times people do show up because they just need to move, and they just need to like unplug, and they just need to, you know, they need to get like, they need to have some movement in their day. They're moving between all these other places where they have so much to do. And what does it mean to just like be allowed to just breathe? But also, what are we going to do with that? Because turning away from it, like, okay, yeah, unplug for a second, you got to calm down. But then what's the doing after that?
Mm-hmm.
Because the continual unplugging, like staying unplugged, that's disassociating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to just keep you separate from the world. So it becomes scenery. And so what does it mean to actually be in a reciprocal relationship with the world, where it's like the world comes into me, I go into the world, and we influence each other? That's deep. And that is something that is tricky to hold in a 90-minute class. And it's tricky to hold in like a decades-long practice.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I feel like I really agree with that. And so I'm going to say that I've gotten a lot more vocal about what I consider to be my truth, for lack of a better way of expressing it, since the election of our most recent president. I felt like at that moment of that day that I found out, I was given license to be as honest as I felt comfortable being in any given space. Because I am a person of color, and especially as a yoga teacher, especially as a teacher in Vermont, I'm often the only person of color in the room. I'm often the only person of color I'll see, in the mirror, in the course of a whole week or a month in the classroom. And so for me, like, one of the studio owners that I worked for once told me that he did not feel that politics was appropriate to bring up in yoga class. And I had to be like, me standing in front of yoga class is a political act.
Yes.
And so my classes are not spaces to unplug in that way. Like, I definitely think that we need downtime. I definitely think that we need like that space to reset the nervous system. Absolutely. But I also have shifted my teaching a lot in the past few weeks, since I've moved away from where I was teaching regular classes all the time. And so now I just travel up monthly and I teach workshops, and I'm teaching one very small sort of mentoring type class for people who are not looking to be teachers yet, but definitely want to go beyond what they're receiving in a 90-minute class. And so I do bring up all of these things, and I do speak to that. I say in the beginning of class to people who don't know me that I kind of give a brief synopsis of what to expect. Because it's just not an option for me. I don't walk into a yoga class myself unplugging, because I just can't. There's always going to be a little bit of that, for coming from being the only person of color in the room, and then again leading the class. There's always going to be a little bit of resistance happening. And so that's what I bring to my teaching, is that I'm talking about how to use our practice as a way, as a method of resistance. And so I'm never going to be that teacher who isn't going to bring up certain things. How I bring it up definitely is not going to be the same every time. But I think the people who come to my classes or who come to work with me, they know what to expect, and they know sort of how it works, and they still do find that time to surrender a bit and to let go and to release the stress that they're experiencing, and to drop into their practice and use it as a way to hold that space in between. I have a lot of students who say, "Oh yeah, I just want to get out of my head," and I have to remind them that yoga is not about getting out of your head. Like, it's not this like escape. It isn't dissociation. It isn't for running away from issues, but learning how to move with them and breathe with them, and to experience all of that human emotion that comes along with moving through life, and all the challenges that arise with it. I definitely see it as a way of remaining present in the face of all of these things. And I don't see it as a way of like ridding yourself of human reaction or reactivity. I think it's like we still want to continue welcoming in all of what comes along with the human condition, because we are divine beings in a human body, having a human experience. And yoga is a great teacher for how to really how to find that balance between the two, without bypassing and going too far in one direction where you really deny your human experience, or forgetting how to continue holding center when shit gets real.
As I'm listening to you two talk, I'm reminded of that moment where I was stepping into the yoga room and I was like, oh God, I really hope she doesn't speak right to what's going on. And I was sitting with that while you two were speaking, and I realized what the thought, really the fully formed thought that I'm now putting together is, God, I hope that this is not like, she's not going to bring her white woman, liberal, light and love conversation
totally
going on, because to me that feels more violent than to actually talk about what's happening. And my nervous system is so shot from that type of violence that that's what I was feeling. And thank you both of you for sharing your input there, because I was able to really sink into that thought, which is something that I see perpetuating a lot in the yoga spiritual conversation is spiritual bypassing and our inability to really be with what's uncomfortable. And I feel like I want to dive there because I know that you two have such good shit to say about it. So let's dive into, first off, the conversation about spiritual bypassing. And what does that even mean for both of you? What is spiritual bypassing? And then we can dive into ways that we see spiritual bypassing and holding space for our feelings. And then we can enlighten the world. And then our job is done. And then all is well. So who wants to start? Spiritual bypassing.
Cool. Well, we should get this settled in less than an hour. Naomi, why don't you go first?
Oh, spiritual bypassing. This is something I'm talking about a lot with so many different kinds of people. Yeah, I mean, I guess to put it like as succinctly as possible, spiritual bypassing to me is really, it comes from a place of privilege, right? And if we're speaking to, okay, if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to use white privilege, capital W, capital P. And you see it's rampant in the community, in the spiritual community. You see it all over the place. And I've had conversations with other teachers and studio owners about this idea that have not gone well, unfortunately. But, just sort of moving beyond the shit, like trying to just ignoring the shadow in an effort to kind of level up, right? To, how do they put it, when you're like high vibing, right? When you're to get to those high vibes, to get up into that like spiritual headspace, to get into your crown chakra, like go to the heart without doing the work in the root. And unfortunately, it's not creating a stable foundation for your practice or your teachings if you're unable to be in that place, if you're unable to let yourself be human for a while.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think part of the spiritual bypassing definitely goes hand in hand with the sort of the giant elephant in the room anytime we talk about yoga, of cultural appropriation. Because what I see when these conversations come up is that this is not an easy conversation to have about like what is the line that we're walking as Western practitioners of an Eastern practice. What does it mean to do it with respect and not to overstep that line? Is it something that even should be done? Like, these are all questions that get talked a lot about at length at various degrees of skill and various degrees of sort of like accountability. But one of the things that I see is like, to the amount that you are unable to sit with discomfort, you will try and bypass out of whatever seems to be causing that discomfort to you. Yeah. So whether that's like if you come to me and tell me like, hey, you're acting really white right now, it's like, how much can I sit with that is directly related to how much I've been able to sit with the discomfort of just that my being creates, right? Like my being as a white person of privilege is problematic at its core, right? Like it had, like, I just like, whereas like Naomi walking in front of being in an all white space is political. So is my presence is also political. We don't get to remove ourselves from that, we don't get to like suddenly enter into this like, high vibes only space where politics don't follow us. It's always there. So that does also mean though that we like what you were saying, Thais, about like your hope that she doesn't like put her like white lady lens on what's real there. I think there needs to be a really, like, we need to make sure that we're not making sense for anybody, which is what I see, like, the white lady lens being often is like trying to like make a story that soothes part of us when like there really might, like, there is, I'm finding in some really deep places in my own meditations is that the only soothing I'm going to get is by going right to the heart of what's really ugly about me and about the world. And that's not a comfortable feeling. And it's not one that like I get to just like, you know, in the 10 minutes I might be talking to a class, be like, and so now we're going to talk about this and like, da, da, da. But it, like, the more that I can hold, the more I can hold for others. So part of it is in learning how to sit more and more and more with the, at times, well, really just like horrific realities of the world as it is right now, and not trying to make it make sense, and not trying to remove the reality to then soothe, but to find some way of finding comfort that's available in the reality versus like this hierarchy that, like, you know, and that's also a thing where like classical yoga makes like branches off from tantric yoga, where tantra sees the world as an ocean where everything is being experienced at once, and classical yoga sees it as a hierarchy. And there's people who have their affinities for either camp for various reasons. For me, I'm drawn to the one that sees everything all mixed in. So it's not like, oh, like yesterday I was angry and today I'm not, so today's a better day than yesterday. It's just that today, like, what's in the stew today, and what am I going to like dive into today? So then is, if we are taking on a role, whether as coaches, as teachers, as whatever kind of, as mentors, whatever it is that we're taking on a role of holding space for other people's experiences, I think what we have to be on like high alert for is where we're trying to soothe other people, keep them comfortable, which is way easier than holding a container that's strong enough to hold other people's discomfort. It's like way easier to just make someone feel comfortable, which is often done through mood making. That's how my teacher refers to it, is a mood making yoga, where you look for the mood that you want and you make that mood happen, right? It's like some days your arms aren't even going to come up. Like when you say, like when someone says like inhale and lift your arms up, your arms aren't even gonna, because it just doesn't even feel possible. So can you sit with that as long as you need to sit with it? Or are you going to like lift your arms up and make it happen? And that's like, I don't want to make it sound like you can't, like sometimes you don't need to just do what needs to be done. But especially, and this goes back again to talking about ritual space, especially when we create this ritual space, like when we are holding any kind of like ritualistic container, can we hold it strong enough so that people don't feel like they have to do anything, that they can just sit with what they're feeling for the time it takes to feel it? And is that something that we can offer as coaches, as mentors, as teachers?
Yes. And I feel that if we use it, spirituality can deepen, and the tool of yoga as one of the many tools in the world of spirituality can deepen our resolve and resilience and ability to be with the uncomfortable, right, through that physical practice. Or it can be used to avoid and to unplug, in a sense, like disassociate, and to remove ourselves from what's really going on. And I'm curious, you know, let's say that someone is listening, doesn't quite know which camp they're in, and how to sit with the uncomfortable, and they're not clear on the differences between, you know, using yoga and spirituality to deepen their identity and their stance in this world, or run away. Like how would we begin to unearth that and address that and talk about that?
Reflection. I think it just happens in the process of practicing yoga over long term consistently. It isn't something necessarily that you can identify immediately always, but something that especially if meditation, observation, and reflection are a part of your practice, so it'll begin to arise. You'll begin to witness. Like if you can allow yourself to remain a witness, you'll observe your own reactions. You'll observe how you respond to either a direction or the words or You'll observe how your body is reacting, how your emotions are responding.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That brings it back to
information
space.
from that. Yeah.
That brings it back to space, like what you were talking about at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning.
Yeah.
I think that the sort of like liminal space, the in between space, which I majored in science in college. I majored in exercise science and psychology, which meant that I was in a lab a lot. And one of the things that I found so fascinating was this idea of repulsion, and also and so like this idea too that like we're never touching anything else, like we're like there's always like a little bit of space that's keeping us separate from something else. I think that one way to kind of guide us, especially those of us who might be for whatever reason struggling extra hard, or might be just trying to find some ground that they can rely on, is in the way that how comfortable are we in sitting with the other as not ourselves, but as also not removed from the experience, from the human experience. Like we talk about othering, and I think we're seeing this right now, unfortunately, with the events of today. We're seeing how the media like rushes to make a white perpetrator of violence into this like lone wolf. Like, look, he's just like he's over there on his own, right? Like, and then in a similar but very different way, if it's a brown or a black person perpetrating violence, they're othered by becoming thugs or terrorists, right? So that's clearly it gone like way wrong. But then if the spiritual bypassing way, I think like takes us to the opposite end of the spectrum, where we merge and we say that we're one. And you hear, and like there's that talk, like people will say things like, oh, well, I was a person of color in a past life, so it's not really that, which like, okay, like potentially that's true, but right now you're not. So how much can you sit with the fact that your experience is not the same than anyone else, than another person's, without trying to make that other person sort of less human in whatever way. And I think that can be found really in the spaciousness, in being able to have space that then we respond rather than react. Whether that's to our own internal stuff that we got going on, because we all got stuff going on internally, or externally, so that we can have the more difficult conversations, so that we can do the difficult work, and not try and remove ourselves from it.
Yeah, I feel like for me, one of the greatest powers that the tradition of yoga has brought me is the power of taking a deep breath. The capacity to remember in any moment that we can breathe instead of act, that we can breathe instead of open our mouths, that we can breathe before we click enter on that mean comment, that is our power. Because like you said, Abby, then we get to decide, how we want to respond rather than simply react. And I'm so grateful for this tradition, for bringing such a potent tool that is available within all of us in any given moment. And I feel like, I don't know if you guys have sensed this, but I can sense when I'm spiritual bypassing, because I can sense this same reactivity happening again and again and again. And that's always an invitation for me when I'm spiritually bypassing. And when I can invite my breath in, that's when I can use that as a portal to deepen my presence, and then ask myself what's here and what is uncomfortable, and how can I explore this even in a greater capacity. And I feel like that kind of bridges perfectly into what we were talking about before we started recording, which is reclaiming feelings. And how can we feel it all without pushing any of it away? So much is going on in our world right now. So what can we do as humans to feel it instead of push it, especially when it's happening to other people and maybe not necessarily impacting our direct lives right now. It's so easy to push away those feelings because it's not directly maybe here. It may happen to someone we know, but it's not directly here. What can we do with that? How can we navigate that?
I feel like it's a difficult question for me to answer because it reminds me of something that one of my teachers said this weekend, where she's an herbalist and she also is a yoga practitioner, but she often speaks to self-care and the importance of self-care and how you need to nourish the self and make sure the self is not depleted before giving of the self in order to help others or come to aid or be a support system to something or someone else. And then she recently taught a retreat in Ireland. And while she was there, she received a message that maybe her thoughts and feelings around self-care were lacking, and that maybe we should be helping even when we're feeling depleted and even before we fully nourish the self. And when she brought this up, I had to say out loud that it's important to recognize that this is the baseline from which marginalized people operate, that we're always operating from a place of near depletion, and that we are continually being asked to step up and take care of our communities and ourselves and each other without necessarily having the space to breathe and find these self-care kind of places. And so I feel like that we just do in some ways. And I think that maintaining a connection to your spiritual practice in and of itself is self-care, but that with everything happening, we have to recognize that there are people who just exist, people who are just living, who are just continuing day to day from these places. And that I almost don't even know how to answer that question because I'm like, you just do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like that question inherently has a slick ton of privilege infused in it, is what I'm hearing. Yeah. Yeah, I recognize that. I see that. Thank you for that, Naomi.
I think part of it is like, how precious are you with your self-care? How precious are you with yourself? Which is like, which can be said in two ways, because we have to hold ourselves as precious and as worthy of care. And, you know, and like, that's the thing of the prism of privilege, is that it's always going to be different. Like my ability to see, I can't see where Naomi's coming from as a Black woman. So it's going to be different for me. But, so, you know, we have to always like keep that in mind, that we're always seeing through our own prism of privilege, of the sort of the myriad of ways. And so that again comes to like, how fully can we sit with someone else and not assume that the individual experience is at all relatable, more so than just that we're humans, you know, but that becomes like, overly simplistic. But then, so, you know, we have to hold ourselves as precious, but precious has like those two meanings, right? Where it's like precious being like worthy of care, and precious is like, you know, only kid gloves, and just like, like if I don't have my specific things that I do for my self-care practice, I just don't know how I'm going to, like, my cup just isn't full. These things are like, they're tricky to talk about too, because like, you know, because trauma is real, and trauma makes makes your edges more raw. And it's like the taking like to like, I've noticed in my own self, like, especially as, you know, like growing up a white kid in a white area. I grew up in New England too. So it's just like it wasn't until I got into my early 20s that I started learning about what I didn't know, you know, and that was painful, and it was like, and it was real. And then there was this like urge to be like, well, we got to do something now. Like we have to do something now. And I think what I'm trying to find now is the spaciousness that makes sure that I'm doing what needs to be done now, and that I'm like able to be receptive to the places that I need to step up even more. Because like what Naomi was saying, it's just like, there's not enough, like assuming that we need to have a full cup to be able to serve others is itself coming from a place of immense privilege, without also like pushing so hard and so fast that I'm reacting rather than responding, like we were talking about before. So I think that as much as possible, that does mean like giving even the infinitesimal space. And I think that that's something where the yogic philosophy, that I'm really grateful for yogic philosophy in the way that it teaches us that time is not linear, and that time, I mean, and just like Einstein talked about, time is relative. So it doesn't need to be a lot of time that we give ourselves to take that moment. And it also might not be enough. And that needs to be like nothing that we do, like everything we do might not be enough, and everything that we receive might not be enough. And can we sit with that too? But also, learning how to take those small moments of care and nourishment, and learning how to cultivate that spaciousness in there so that we can do what needs to be done without having to like run off, without either reaching burnout or needing or feeling like we need to have this, like these sort of like precious kid gloves around ourselves.
Right. Exactly.
I think that's a very important point. I want to reiterate that point because I feel like it's so important, that I feel like oftentimes we bubble wrap self-care to mean that we need the luxury of all of these things and tools and time to actually fill up our cup. Right? That we need, if we don't have a yoga practice that day, we feel off. We can't really operate. And therefore, we're not really responsible for our bitchiness because, well, I'm not in my body. I didn't have my 10-hour meditation practice this morning or whatever. And to remember that, that time that we can fill up with the littlest of things, and that we don't need to fill up fully, but there is always accessible to choose this moment of care without having to make it some grandiose thing that becomes in and of itself extremely privileged and inaccessible for most people. I feel like that's a mic drop moment. I feel like we could just end that conversation there. I just feel like that point is so potent. So let's talk about feelings. And kind of drive the point home, if there is a point, which is, what is the role that our feelings play as we move into spiritual practice and as we move into the world? Like what is the relationship with feelings that can nurture us and propel us, instead of, bypassing and shutting us down and keeping us disassociated?
One thing I think is important to remember is that feelings, while we think of them as being pretty deep and pretty profound, they're actually pretty superficial in a certain kind of way. And also, without implying that feelings don't deserve our attention, a lot of times what we feel is true and what is true might not be the same.
Yes.
And that's always getting kind of seen, and that always is getting kind of sort of refracted through whatever prism of privilege that we're experiencing. And I use the word prism because I'm trying to find ways to acknowledge that there's so many different layers, right? I think the three of us know that, but I want to make sure that that's clear in what I'm saying. So when we're like acknowledging feelings, it's important, but how true are those feelings? And also, can we have the space to have our feelings and be receptive to the reality as it is, including the reality of someone else, which if we're in a conversation or a relationship or a conflict of whatever kind, that's going to include possibly feelings that contradict our own, and that can be a whole other level of feelings. So I think, in my own practice, and recently, since Hurricane Harvey, my own practice has been really grappling with a lot of fear, like not just and not cutesy fear, like deep, dark places of fear. The best thing I've found is to find a space that is as physically safe as possible. I'm fortunate that I do have that, to go into it, like to turn towards it and not try and push it away. And I feel lucky that I have that. But we have to, I think there needs to be ways that we can, I think the physical practice of yoga, or really any embodiment practice, but yoga in particular, is the way that it helps us kind of separate out reality from feelings, that like by really like exploring the ways that we feel versus what could be real. Because I could feel threatened by someone and not at all be threatened, right? Like my feelings of I could feel sad or hurt or whatever it is, and that could not be true, but it is true in my lived experience, in my felt experience, but it's not necessarily true. So yoga, I think, offers ways, and spiritual and this embodied spiritual practice offers ways to come apart and come back together. And I think that is that in so much as we can kind of peel apart the layers of our feelings and then put ourselves back together. I don't know if that really makes sense, because like I said, I'm in it, but hopefully some part of that landed true for
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of thinking, feelings for me relay a lot of information. So in my practice, when I'm experiencing my feelings, then, I mean, it's always important for me to have that witness and cultivating that witness, so that as feelings arise, I can glean from them the information that I need to. I learn things about myself, or I learn things about an experience I'm having. And so, yeah, it does come back to space, being able to have the space where I can have the feelings, but also I can also observe the feelings. Like, why am I feeling this fear right now? Like, I'm having fear. Like, in this moment, I'm afraid, but I got to stop and be like, why am I afraid? What is causing the fear? And through creating that space and retaining that witness, I can kind of move through the fear or just experience the fear, but also realize that, yes, it may not actually be something to be afraid of. It may not, what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling isn't necessarily the reality. And so I think it's important to learn how to relate to your surroundings and also how to move through trauma. I feel like this is a way for me to actually move through the trauma that I experience in my own life, or have experienced in my own life, to be able to be like, well, is this a moment in which I need to be afraid? I need to act on that fear and make myself safe? Or is this a moment in which I'm reliving something from the past? And how can I help myself move through that and make it easier? And so that in the future, perhaps I'll be a little bit less afraid of this experience, and so on and so forth, just to continue with the theme of fear. So I feel like feelings are extremely informative. And, it's true that they're not always, quote unquote, real, and they're temporary. They're not permanent at all in any way, shape, or form. And that they're only this very superficial experience of ourselves with a capital S. And I appreciate that.
I love this so much. And I love how yoga can teach us so much about expanding our container and offering the space so that we can do this work, and then also go into the world and make sure we're not perpetuating our hurts. And operating in the space where we can hold for the container of others. And I have seen that to be true in my life again and again and again. And like both of you said, it is a practice and it is a continual evolvement. And I think it's a really incredible platform for which we can untangle from our emotions and create something really beautiful from them. So I feel like we can keep going on so many other tangents around yoga. And I feel like we've covered so much ground, from, spiritual bypassing and, systemic oppression and feelings. And I'm so grateful for both of you for your time and in sharing your incredible truths around this topic. Is there any final words that you want to share and leave with our listeners on this topic?
I think it needs to be said that all of this takes time, and that, the next time you're on your mat or the next time you're sitting in meditation, that, you might continue to experience the same challenges, and you might not immediately be able to shift your experience of self-care, but to continue to keep watching, to continue to keep witnessing, and continue to keep trying to cultivate that space, and just sort of observing how things shift for you and how your relationship to yourself and the environment in the world and current events maybe shift so that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I think staying soft is a radical act in a world that is so hard.
Mm.
Staying soft and receptive.
Yeah, I see that as curiosity and kindness. Those are the two ways that I see softness play out in a very powerful way in my life. Yeah. Thank you, beauties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abigail, Naomi, and I had a lot of thoughts around yoga, and now we want to hear yours. Come hang out with us on Facebook. You can find Abigail at Abigail Rose Clarke, Naomi at Tribe and Truth, and me at I Am Thais Sky. And if you want to check out more of Abigail's work, go to www.abigailroseclarke.com. If you want to learn more about Naomi's work, go to www.tribeandtruth.com. And if you want to learn more about me and my work, go to www.thaissky.com. See you next week.